Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to this premium support webinar. Today's topic is detection triage, and my name is Stephen Morley, and I'm a technical account manager based in the UK. Before I start today's presentation, there are two things that I'd like to highlight. Firstly, everyone attending today's webinar will receive a copy of this presentation, so there's no need to capture screenshots or take detailed notes. And secondly, you will not have the ability to talk during this webinar. So if you do have any questions during the presentation, please use the dedicated Q&A function in Zoom, either while I'm presenting or wait for the Q&A section at the end of this webinar. In today's webinar, I'll discuss what detections are, the key items that are shown in each detection, as well as how to triage detections. I'll then discuss some additional resources before finishing with a live demo and Q&A. So first, let's define what detections are. Detections are notifications of suspicious or malicious activity in your environment. A detection may highlight a single event or multiple events on the same host, so either different detection types, different tactics and techniques, or repeated detections of the same type inside the same process tree. And multiple detection events in the same process tree will be more common, where at least some of the active prevention measures in your policies are disabled. Full detection details are retained on a rolling 90-day basis in the Falcon console, and there's no scope to increase this retention period. However, separate detection summary records are retained for a full year for audit and reporting purposes. Now, these summaries cannot be processed or investigated in depth, and again, that one-year retention period for those summaries cannot be extended. And those same detection summaries are also published via our Event Streams API, and that's used by a number of our integrations and a number of third-party integrations, including our own SIM connector. By default, email alerts are also sent to all registered email addresses for any detection of medium severity or higher. And you can change the list of registered email addresses in the general settings page of the Falcon console. If you'd also like to receive email alerts for low severity detections, then please contact support and we can enable that for you. You may also use custom workflows to send notifications via email, Slack, PagerDuty, ServiceNow, Microsoft Teams, or a custom webhook when a new detection is raised or a detection is modified with optional filters across a large number of fields. So if you'd like to alert different teams based upon the host type or the detection type or the detection severity, you may use workflows to do that. Detection severity is shown in the console, indicated by the icon color, and it's also stated in plain text alongside the icon. The detection icon also indicates if a preventative action was taken, so whether a process was blocked, a process was killed, or an operation was blocked, if an action could have been taken, but the required prevention policy was disabled, if the detection was raised by our Falcon Overwatch team, and if the detection contains an IOA or IOC associated with a known threat actor. Each detection contains basic host and process information, so fields like the host name, the process names, file names, command lines, and usernames involved in the detection, as well as the operations performed by those processes. Our detections are mapped to the MITRE ATT&CK framework's tactics and techniques, and as well as the MITRE ATT&CK classification, each detection also contains a description that tells you why the detection was raised and what we recommend you do next. The actions taken, so again, whether a process was blocked, a process was killed, or an operation was blocked, and so forth, will relate both to the applied prevention policy and our confidence that the detection is not a false positive. With a best practice prevention policy in place, the majority of your detections are likely to include preventative actions. However, there may still be detections that we have chosen not to block based upon their potential to include false positives. And this is why it is key to have good prevention policies in place and to triage all detections, paying close attention to the detection description, as well as the severity, tactic, and technique. Detections are shown in the Endpoint Security Endpoint Detection section of the Falcon console, and they can be filtered by a number of fields. A selection of common fields are shown in the main body of the detections page by default, and a wider selection of fields is available via the Add Remove Filters button in the filter bar. Detections can also be grouped. and sorted as needed. All applied filter, grouping, and sorting parameters are reflected in the URL query string. So if you have a particular filter that you like to use, you can bookmark the page as configured rather than recreating your settings each time. When grouped, detections can be processed as a group. You may choose to process all filter detections, or more likely, one or more groups of detections at the same time. As a starting point, you may wish to group machine learning detections by hash, as machine learning detections are based upon the file contents prior to execution. And all other detection types, which we broadly class as behavioral detections, should be grouped by either command line or triggering file as a starting point. Detections can be assigned across the team and should be tracked via status updates. So you should move a detection from new to in progress when it is assigned to a team member, and from in progress to closed once you've completed your investigation. You should also consider using tags to add labels to detections, such as incident numbers or true positive or false positive status, and use comments to add further detail that's specific to that detection, such as any work that's been performed to date and any outstanding actions that still need to be performed. We'll now look in detail at the data shown in each detection. So here's an example of a simple detection as shown in the endpoint detections page. At the top of the detection, we can see a summary showing the detection severity, the time at which the detection was raised, the MITRE tactic and technique associated with the detected activity, the triggering file, the host name in which the detection occurred, the username associated with the captured activity, who the detection is assigned to, if anyone, and the detection status, in this case still showing as new. And then on the left-hand side of the detection summary, we can see the detection icon, which in this case shows that the process was blocked. And on the right-hand side of the detection summary, we can see the triple dot menu. And this triple dot menu provides drill-down options to the full detection details, as well as the ability to edit the status of the detection. Below the detection summary, we see a process tree. Starting at the bottom, we see the process that triggered the detection, in this case PowerShell, with another icon acting as a handy reminder that the process was blocked. And above PowerShell, we can see a list of parent processes that ultimately launch the PowerShell process, as well as an overview of the operations performed by each process. Scrolling down the detection tree a little further shows us the detections themselves. In this case, 2 detections were triggered by the same process across 2 separate tactics and techniques. And again, note the detection description field, as this tells you why the detection was raised and what we recommend you do next. When we first select a detection, or when we later select a process in the detection tree, the right-hand panel will refresh to show additional contextual data for the selected process. In this case, we're looking at PowerShell again, but we can select any of the processes in the tree to see details for that specific process. For example, in this case, we've selected the SVC host process and navigated to the disk operations section of the right-hand panel to view the list of DLL files that were loaded by this process. Depending upon the subscriptions that you have purchased, you will see a number of expandable sections in the right-hand panel, including sections that capture the operations performed by the process as it ran. For example, the hash section shows the hash itself, the external and internal prevalence of the hash, that is, how common this hash is across our customer base, and how common this hash is in your own environment. We can also see the total number of hosts on which this hash has been seen, the total number of detections raised for this hash, and the hash action, which will either show no action by default, or if you've chosen to block list or allow list a hash, then this section will show always block or never block, respectively. And we can also see a timeline of process executions for this hash, as well as a pivot point to the indicator page to see all hosts on which this hash has been seen. Another key section to note if you are an Overwatch subscriber is the Notes from Overwatch section, which may be used to highlight additional activities and recommended actions based upon the activities seen within that process tree. Pivoting to the full detection details from the detection list shows 4 tabs that we can explore. The first of these, the Details tab, provides an easy-to-read overview of the detection. This view also includes a status log, that tracks any changes applied to the detection, including assignment changes, status updates, tags, and comments. The Process Table tab shows the same information as the detections list and in the same format, but also adds an interactive and searchable legend to allow you to quickly highlight processes and operations within the detection tree. And the Process Tree tab shows the same information again as the Process Table and the detections list, but this time in a condensed graphical format. And the key additions to this view are the plus and minus icons as highlighted in this slide, which allow you to explore parent, sibling, and child processes in more detail. And selecting any process in this view, including those parent, sibling, and child processes, will refresh the right-hand panel to show further details for the selected process. And finally, the Events Timeline tab provides a consolidated timeline of the operations performed by all of the processes in the detection tree without needing to select each process in turn. Next, we'll discuss how to triage detections. So, to triage detections as part of your ongoing operations, we suggest that you prioritize and group them as appropriate, based upon their severity, their tactic and technique, the host type on which the detection was raised and the risk that that represents, and whether or not the detection included any preventative actions. As mentioned previously, you should then group detections and process them as a group where possible. For example, machine learning detections are raised at execution time before the process has performed any actions, and as such, it is appropriate to group machine learning detections by hash, as once you've reviewed one detection for each hash, you can likely apply the same judgment, the same follow-up actions, and the same tag, true positive, false positive, etc., to all of the machine learning detections for that hash. Contrast this with detections for PowerShell, where grouping by command line is the most sensible approach to take. When you begin your investigation, you should consider whether it is appropriate to contain the host while you complete your work. For example, if you suspect a ransomware attack is underway, then containing affected hosts would be a logical first step. Make sure that you then review full details for at least one example of each detection type. So again, each hash for a machine learning detection or each command line for a PowerShell detection. And note that even a simple looking detection may require further investigation to confirm whether it is a true positive or a false positive, and there may be follow-up investigation and remediation work required both in and outside of the Falcon console. For example, there may be associated files and registry settings to clean up, and you may wish to investigate the IOAs and IOCs shown in the detection and ensure that all relevant data is captured by your wider security suite, so in your firewalls, your intrusion prevention systems, your spam filtering, and so on. And while there is a good level of information contained in each detection, make sure that you've also consulted additional reports where available and where relevant. For example, you may wish to use the global search bar at the top of the console to search for additional detections and incidents on the same host, or simply filter and group detections by host. You may wish to pivot to a host search to see the activities performed on the host during the detection period, even outside of the detection itself. And you may wish to search for any identified IOCs on other hosts using our predefined reports or custom event searches. And if you're a Falcon Intelligence subscriber, you may also use our intelligence reports to identify additional IOCs, trends, and risks. As you triage each detection, consider using comments to add further information, such as external incident or ticket numbers, the steps you've performed to date, and any outstanding items that still need to be performed. And you may also use tags to classify and group your detections, for example, as true positives or false positives, and you may search detections using these tag values at a later date. If, during the course of your investigation, you find that the detection is a true positive, and you did not contain the affected hosts at the start of your investigation, then consider it again here. You should then perform additional investigation and remediation work as needed. For example, by using our real-time response feature to kill processes, to remove files, and to delete or modify registry keys. If you see disabled preventions, then make sure that you follow up by closing any gaps in your prevention policies, as this will reduce the risk and volume of follow-up work required on an ongoing basis. And this is especially important as a new customer, but even long-term customers should note that we regularly add new features into our prevention policies, and that these new features will be disabled by default. As such, you should also consider subscribing to our release notes and subscribing to our premium support newsletter. And if nothing else, please ensure that you review the health check and business review that we send to you on a quarterly basis as a part of your premium support subscription, as this will highlight any discrepancies in your configuration from our best practices. If, however, you know that the detection is a false positive, then you should consider whether you should allow list it. A single unique false positive detection may not justify any further action, but repeated false positives should be allow listed to prevent legitimate applications from being blocked and to reduce ongoing noise and associated follow-up work. You may allow list machine learning detections by hash using the IOC management page, or by path using machine learning exclusions. All other detection types, which again are broadly classed as behavioral detections, may be allow listed using IOA exclusions. Although there are a small number of detection types that cannot be directly allow listed in the console. In those cases, the Create Exclusion button will be disabled, and the tooltip shown on mouse over will state that you must contact support and request that we create an exclusion for that detection type. When raising any such support case, you must include details of the detection that you want to allow list, and you must also state what the program is and why it should be allow listed. Now, this doesn't need to be a lengthy explanation, but just state that you have investigated it and it's an internal application, a third-party application, an admin script, whatever it may be, that you know to be a false positive. And please also note that any allow listing requests must either be raised by or approved by a user holding either the Falcon administrator role or the detections exceptions manager role. And finally, if you are a multi-SID customer or an MSSP, please include the customer ID, the CID or SID value, for the tenant in which the detection was raised. Now, you may be tempted to use sensor visibility exclusions to allow us detections or to carry over exclusions from your previous AV vendor, but please don't do either. Sensor visibility exclusions should not be used for allow listing. They are intended to be used in limited circumstances only to reduce the performance impact of the sensor for critical processes such as software build pipelines. And even in such circumstances, sensor visibility exclusions should be viewed as a measure of last resort. They're a great way to test if we're having an impact on a system, but they're not a particularly great solution from a security perspective. And similarly, carrying over AV exclusions from a previous vendor is somewhat akin to saying that I had a hole in my old back door and I'd like a matching hole in my new one. It's highly unlikely that you'll require the same exclusions to be applied across different AV vendors, particularly as CrowdStrike does not interrupt and inspect all basic file I/O. And finally, when creating any exclusion, whether that's a machine learning exclusion, an IOA exclusion, or a sensor visibility exclusion, please ensure that you make them as specific, that is, as narrow as possible, with full paths and file names preferred over the use of wildcards, and with exceptions, exclusions being applied to a specific group for specific hosts, rather than all hosts in your environment. And for your future reference, I've included 3 flowcharts that summarize the detection triage process. So here we're looking at the one for investigation, and then we have a flowchart for true positives and one for false positives as well. So once you receive this slide deck after this webinar, feel free to use those as a quick reference source for appropriate actions within the console based upon what you see in your detections. Finally, before moving on to Q&A and the demo, let's discuss some additional resources. So this webinar focuses on detection triage and only mentions incidents in passing. We, the TAM team, also host a feature brief on CrowdScore, which discusses incidents in more detail. However, as a brief overview, detections and incidents are both notifications of suspicious or malicious activity in your environment, and they should both be triaged in a similar way. Detections may highlight a single event or multiple events for the same host inside the same process tree, whereas incidents always consist of multiple detections, and they may highlight multiple events across multiple process trees on the same host, or even multiple events across multiple hosts. Incidents may be triggered by standard detections, that is the detections that are shown in the endpoint detections page and everything we're talking about today, but incidents may also be triggered by contextual detections, and those only exist inside the scope of an incident. Or an incident may be triggered by both standard and contextual detections. And those contextual detections are simply events that in and of themselves do not justify detection. So in isolation, they are low confidence indicators of suspicious or malicious activity. However, when multiple contextual detections are combined, they may justify an incident being raised, even where no standard detection has been raised. And finally, some practical considerations for detections versus incidents. Firstly, while detections can be allowed listed, incidents cannot be allowed listed in the console, as they're largely unique in nature. And secondly, while detections are scored using a descriptive severity only, so critical, high, medium, low, or informational, as discussed earlier, incidents are scored both descriptively and numerically from 0 to 10. And this numerical score allows your aggregate incident score, a measure of your environment's global risk, to be tracked over time. And this is how we derive the CrowdStrike figure shown in the activity dashboard when you first log in. The pre-prepared reports mentioned earlier are part of the Investigate application. They are based upon the raw event data streamed from your host to our cloud. And to view these reports and the associated data, an Insight subscription is required. A number of dashboards and reports can be accessed from within the detection itself, with the required parameters such as the host name, the indicator value, and the date and time preset to appropriate values. For example, the host search shows process, file, registry, and network activity for the selected host and time frame. And the hash search shows where a hash has been seen in your environment, showing where it was first seen, where it was written, loaded, detected, and blocked. As well as using the pre-prepared reports, you may also run custom event searches, searching, correlating, and filtering the raw data sent from your host to our cloud. And while this is a big topic and outside the scope of this webinar, we do have further details for you. So for further details on the pre-prepared reports, the event data collected from your hosts, and some example queries that you can use, please attend our Investigating with Falcon Insight Best Practices webinar. Our standard product documentation also contains further information on incident and detection monitoring, real-time response and network containment, and the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And we also offer instructor-led training and certification via CrowdStrike University, including our administrator, responder, and what was formerly called our hunter training, but is now called Investigating and Querying Event Data with a Falcon EDR. So if you're new to the platform, I highly recommend looking at those Falcon 200, 201, and 202 courses. So for further details, please talk to your account manager, talk to your named TAM if you have one, or see the CrowdStrike University section of our website for an overview of all available training courses and certifications. As mentioned earlier, the TAM team also prepare health checks and business reviews for every premium support customer on a quarterly basis. So please ensure that you review our findings and address any gaps in your current configuration when you receive these reports. And we do also host additional webinars. A summary of these webinars is hosted in the support portal with announcements and reminders included in our premium support newsletter. To subscribe to that newsletter, again, ask your name, TAM if you have one, or send an email to our distribution list, which, as shown on screen, is tam-team@crowdstrike.com. And you can also contact your named TAM or send an email to our distribution list for any ad hoc best practice questions that you may have. I'll now switch to a live demo and open the session for Q&A. So if you've been holding any questions so far, feel free to type those out now. Obviously, if you don't have any questions, then first and foremost, thanks for attending. I do hope you found it useful. And as a reminder, a copy of this presentation will be sent to your registered email address in the next day or two. And again, if you have any questions after this webinar, then again, please work with your name TAM if you have one, or send an email to our DL, which is tam-team@crowdstrike.com. And again, just going to briefly pause my share here, switch over to a live demo environment, and we'll continue from there shortly. So here we are in one of our internal test environments. I mentioned that for two reasons, really. One is that you may see things in this environment that you do not see in your own environment. Particularly when we go to the menu here, you may see a lot of different subscriptions that you haven't purchased, so many options that you may not have seen. And then secondly, I mentioned it as, again, it's just a demo environment. The data in here isn't being monitored by an active SOC. It isn't being triaged actively. And some of the prevention policies we have applied to the hosts in this test environment are purposefully banned because we obviously want to see interesting data for testing purposes. Now, with that said, we're looking at the activity dashboard here, and this is the landing page that you will see when you first log into the console. Probably not something you're going to look at in detail on a regular basis, but maybe something you'll have up on a screen in a shared environment if you happen to all be working from the office again these days. So running through from top to bottom, first we see the current crowd score, the global measure of risk in this environment, again, very low, which is a good thing. If this was high, it would be a bad thing. Then we see a breakdown of the open detections. So detections still in new status, the most common hashes that are triggering detections, the most common hosts that are triggering detections. Then if you're an Overwatch subscriber, you'll see the number of total Overwatch analyzed events. So that includes those events analyzed both by humans and by our automated machinery in the Overwatch team. And then from that total of analyzed events, we see 31 hunting leads that required investigation and 3 detections that were triggered. So again, a breakdown of everything Overwatch looked at, everything human analysts in Overwatch looked at in detail, and the number of detections that were raised to you as an end customer. Again, if you're not an Overwatch customer, you won't see these 3 widgets. Then below that, we see a graph showing crowd score over time for this environment. So we can see that it has peaked and dropped over time. We see a list of recent detections, and then we see a breakdown of detections by tactic and technique. Again, probably not something you're going to visit on a frequent basis, but maybe something you'll have open a shared environment just as a general sort of global status page. And then almost everything we've talked about today sits here within the endpoint security, endpoint detection section of the console. And you'll see that we have 2 pages here, an updated experience and a deprecated experience. So this demo environment is in the middle of our Raptor migration. So we have our old legacy-based pages and our new pages going forwards, our Raptor-based pages going forwards. Today's presentation has been entirely about endpoint detections using the Raptor framework here. So if we access this updated detections page, what we see, as mentioned in the presentation, is a list of all detections that were raised in this environment in the last 90 days. So again, great as a starting point, but probably not where you want to come to every day once you're used to working in the environment. You'll probably want to come to a filtered version of this view. And again, as mentioned in the presentation, you have some basic filters here that are included in the page by default, as well as a much larger list of fields that you can activate via the Add Remove Filters button here. So if I'm coming in, say, at the start of the week, I want to perhaps come in here, select the time filter to last week, and maybe select the status to new as well before I process these any further. And then again, we still have quite a number of detections here, over 1,000 in this environment. I might want to start thinking how I'm going to then process those. So in this case, I might want to filter on detections that have a machine learning tactic and technique. And then because I'm looking at machine learning detections, which again are based on what the file is, what the process is before it runs, before it's performed any actions, it makes the most sense to group these detections by hash. And you may have noticed as we've been going along, all of these parameters we've been selecting have been reflected in the URL query string here. So we can see we have a filter where the timestamp is set to last week, the status is set to new, the tactic is set to machine learning, and so on. And that includes the grouping parameters as well. So once we've done this filtering, we want to open up one of these groups and we want to look at the detections that were raised. So we can see here 88 detections for a single hash across 4 different hosts. When we open up that list, we're going to see all of the individual detection summaries here. And if we select a single detection within this list, we'll also see the process tree as we discussed in the presentation, or at least we will when it loads. Second, folks, it is a demo system. There we go. And again, what we're seeing here is the detection that was raised, in this case, a machine learning detection with a description that tells you that it meets our ML engine's high confidence threshold for being a malicious file. And as we scroll up, we see details of the process itself and the parent processes for the detected process. Again, very much as we discussed in the presentation there. If, however, we're not looking at machine learning detections, so for example, if I want to exclude machine learning as the tactic rather than include it, I click apply here. Grouping by hash doesn't really make any sense for non-ML based detections. So instead, we want to consider either grouping by command line or perhaps by triggering file. And again, you might want to filter further based upon your own interests, your own specialities, the detections that you're looking at that point in time. So if I were, for example, to filter on maybe, let's say, PowerShell detections, and then group by command line, again, I'll be able to see if there are any common PowerShell one-liners here. So in this case, again, I can see 19 detections were created for this specific command line. 7 for this one, so on and so forth. So again, assuming that the actions that I see and the operations that I see in this tree are relatively consistent, much like I did for machine learning detections, I can look at one of these detections in detail and apply the same classification to all detections for that same PowerShell one-liner. So in this case, obviously very easy to see that it's a demo environment and we're invoking some defanged version of Mimikatz to trigger detections. So again, pretty easy to say that's a true positive rather than a false positive, and I can follow up accordingly. Now, when I do process these detections as a group, I want to be very much aware that there is a checkbox for every group and also a checkbox for everything shown in this filtered list. So whilst this details checkbox here is selecting everything that I'm looking at, everything that I've filtered out using these parameters, I probably don't actually want to use this at any point in time. I probably much more likely want to come in, look at a specific detection for a specific command line, or again, a specific hash for a machine learning detection. And I will probably want to edit that group rather than all detections shown on screen. And if I do click edit, what I can do here, as mentioned in the presentation, I can set their status from new to in progress or to closed. I can assign them out to a particular team member. Again, when that loads, I can assign them out to a particular team member. So again, it may make sense to push them to a particular person for investigation if I want to, or if I'm the person that's completed my investigation, I might want to close those out and then set them to true positive or false positive as needed. So again, you typically want to edit one group at a time. You want to make sure the detections are consistent, so that based on what you're grouping on, the tactic and technique, and the actions seen in those trees. And you probably don't want to use this global button. You probably only want to use this one down there. Then if we move from this list of detections to an individual detection, we can see here, again, this is a machine learning detection. And we can see from the process tree and indeed from the right-hand panel here that the process was blocked and the file was quarantined. So if that's all you see within a detection tree, generally speaking, that a ML detection was raised and a process was blocked and quarantined, you've got to think about, what am I going to do? What's my next actions here? So again, if it's a false positive, I definitely want to follow up and allow this hash if it's common in my environment. But if it's a one-off, maybe I just want to release that file from quarantine, which doesn't allow us that hash on a permanent basis, but does at least allow that specific user to execute that file again on that host. Or in particular, if I'm new to CrowdStrike, not feeling that confident what I'm seeing yet, what you might want to do is look at some of the pivot points. So you'll see from many places within the detection itself, you can pivot down into different menus and different reports. So from investigate and actions here at the top of the detection, and indeed even from these individual sections. Again, I have these triple dot menus where I can investigate, find further detail. And if we move down to the hash section, there we go. If we move down to the hash section, we can also see pivot points both inside the Falcon console and outside of the Falcon console. So if, for example, you're familiar with VirusTotal, you could choose to pivot to a VirusTotal search outside of the Falcon console and get a quick quorum score for that hash. So you don't just have to, as a new user, trust our machine learning detections. You can see what the sort of group score, the average score is across lots of different security products. So again, obviously VirusTotal not part of CrowdStrike product suite, but you can nevertheless pivot into a VirusTotal search if you have your own access to get a quorum score there. So again, pretty simple to process an ML detection if it's been blocked and quarantined. You can reference internally if it's a false positive. Make sure you've agreed that with the app team or the system owners internally and understood that before you allow this. If it's a true positive, then in some ways good news if it was blocked, but you still need to ask how it got there onto that host as well. And we'll talk about that a little bit more around a second detection. So here we're looking at a non-ML detection, and this is very much where the demo environment caveat I provided earlier comes into play. So you'll see there are lots of different detection types for lots of different processes within this tree. And that, even with the best will in the world, makes it quite difficult to read in this detections list. So this is where we probably do want to pivot into the full detection details. And when we do that, by default, we're going to land in the process tree view. And as mentioned in the presentation, this is going to show you essentially the same information that you can see in the detection list, but in a condensed graphical format. So if I look through the process tree here, I can see in this case, we're starting from the host through the system process down to a Windows logon, Explorer, Outlook, Word, PowerShell. So it looks like we've got a phishing simulation here. And I can see lots of color coding here for detected processes that could have been blocked. I can see process injection and so on and so forth. So in this case, the only part of that was blocked was the ML detection. The rest could have been blocked, as you see by these little gray circles here, but wasn't blocked based upon the prevention policy assigned to this host. So again, it's a demo environment. We want to have interesting things to talk about. We don't want to just block things in the first step. But because this is complicated to look through, again, easier to look at it in this graphical format, and you can also use this legend here to highlight individual processes. So if you'd like to start looking at the critical detections first, you can see that they were triggered by both PowerShell and VSS admin. If you'd like to look at processes where the thread was injected, now, okay, we see the line here, but if there was more than one, you would again see these in this section of the host. So it's, section of the legend. So it's a nice interactive legend that you can browse around. And similarly, if I want to look at any particular operation without clicking each process in turn, I can open up the network operations view here and see which processes performed that operation or those network operations. Then on the right-hand side, regardless of the process that I select, I can scroll down and see details for the process execution. I can see details for the hash, for the host, any network operations that perform, disk operations that perform, so on and so forth. And as mentioned in the presentation, these first three views are semi-equivalent. So process tree and process table. Process table, very much the same thing as the detections list itself, but you still have this explorable, expandable legend. You still have the right-hand panel. And the details view is a nice flat view, so making it a little bit easier to run through and read here than perhaps the table list is, but still, as you can see, quite a lot of information in here. And the key addition to this view as well, if we do have any here, is going to be the status log. So whether we've added a comment to the detection or whether we've applied a status from, say, new to in progress or in progress to closed, that will be shown here in the status log. And then the final view of the four views shown here is the events timeline. And again, as mentioned in the presentation, this is essentially a consolidation of the right-hand panel. So if you were to select each process in turn, you see all of these individual operations. But if you want to, you can actually just browse through the list of operations in that process tree by coming to this events timeline view. You can filter the view based on specific event types if you'd like to, or you can just browse down the view and see what was actually performed. So again, we can see the system process here. We can see network connections. We can see DLLs being loaded. And if we get down far enough, lots of pages here, I'm sure. Let's see if we get to a different process. Where are we? Yep, there we go. So we have another process to start. So SMSS, WinLogon, etc. And again, we can walk down this list and see the timeline of events that happened throughout all of the processes in the detection tree. And again, if we're looking at particular operations, we can filter the events to only show a specific detection type. So if we wanted to, for example, ignore file reads and ignore network operations, we could still instead be looking at scripts being written to disk, executables written to disk, or other files being written to disk. So let's go down to the first page for that. And again, you can see processes starting, executables being written out, etc. So if you're trying to home in on perhaps other suspicious or malicious activity that was happening in and around the time of the detection itself, this events timeline view, this filterable events timeline view, is a nice place to start. As well as that, from the right-hand panel or from the detection list itself, you can pivot into a host search from the detection. Now, when you do that, it's going to automatically populate the host ID, the agent ID or AID field, and it's only going to set the drill down here to the last day by default. So again, particularly if you're thinking this is hands-on or maybe insider activity where there could have been things happening over an extended period of time, you probably want to come in here. And depending on your retention period, set this drop down to the last week at least. And then across the top here, you have a section of tabs with basic host details, detection details, process and service details, command line admin tool usage, suspicious file activity, registry tasks, firewall, and networking. So if you come through this list, again, basic host details, just going to show you an overview of the host details that we have itself. So not too much exciting here, but if you were wanting to launch a real-time response session for that host, for example, you can do that from within this page as well as from the detection itself. If you're looking at a particular detection on a host and you want to see if other detections have been raised on that host, again, you can do that from the detections tab here. And then getting to the meat of things, running through the processes and service tab is going to show the processes that were executed, the services that were running. It's going to show you any particular command line usage and admin tool usage within here as well. So in this case, we can see a bunch of admin tools, SC, etc., who am I, and so on, were launched on this host. And again, rounding out the other tabs, we can see any suspicious file activity, so files being written to disk that may require further investigation and cleanup. Suspicious registry activity, scheduled tasks being registered, and firewall rules attempted to be changed, as well as networking requests being created as well. So that was all I wanted to cover as a brief run through of the live demo. Obviously, I appreciate that's a quick run through and there's nothing like familiarity. So I'd encourage you all to become much more familiar with your own environments and get a little bit more familiar with these reports and these options. And then if anyone had any other specific questions, I see my colleagues have picked up a few already. And we did have one asking if I'd be covering XDR detection. So no, this session only covers endpoint detections, as mentioned briefly earlier. XDR detections are, for if you're curious, essentially a centralized place where you can look at multiple different detection types, so extended detection and response. So that would include simple endpoint detections. If you were a CrowdStrike identity threat protection customer, you'd also see identity detections within there. And indeed, if you were a customer that had a third-party integration activated and implemented via our CrowdStrike store, then again, you would potentially see additional detections or at least additional contextual data from those third-party systems within the XDR incident workbench, but that's not going to be covered today in detail, I'm afraid. That said, plenty of time left, so if you do have any questions, feel free to type those out now. I'm just going to pause for a couple of minutes to give you that time. No open questions at this point, folks. I'm just going to run through the ones that my colleagues kindly picked up while I was presenting. So the first is, if a detection is a known detection and it's something that comes up every day, is there a way we can make it ignored? The detection is occurring when we run the executable file in our end-of-day procedures. So yes, depending on the detection type, as my colleague Stefan said, you can either create an ML exclusion if it's an ML detection. So that could be a path-based exclusion if you need it to be. Or you could use the IOC management page and add a specific hash-based exclusion in for an ML-based detection. Or if it's not a machine learning detection, you then need an IOA exclusion to allow list that. And as Stefan said, we do have an allow listing and block listing webinar that runs through those details in much more detail. So if you're able to register and attend via the link in the support portal, please do so. If not, if you don't have the time to attend or there isn't a session that suits you, if you search for webinar recordings within the support portal, you should see a recording of the allow listing, block listing webinar, and in fact, this webinar and many others as is useful to you. And another interesting question raised here, if we want to create a custom email notification workflow, you mentioned something to contact support. No, so there are two areas where you can send detection notifications. So the general settings page includes a field that you can specify a list of email addresses in. And let's see if we can see that in this demo instance here. General settings, there we go. But this is just going to allow us to enter a list of flat email addresses, which will then receive notifications for any detection of any type being raised at medium severity or higher. So yeah, here we go. Manage list for detections and it's emails. If you enter a list of email notifications there, anything of medium severity or higher will result in an email being sent to you. If you want to split those detections out, if those sort of blanket emails are not so useful for you, that's when you could move to Falcon Fusion workflows. And then you can create a workflow based upon a new detection being raised, for example. And then you can filter based upon the tactic and technique for that detection or the severity for that detection, or perhaps even the group or tag associated with those hosts. So if you need to send, for argument's sake, workstation detections to one team and server detections to another team, or maybe Windows detections or Linux detections to different teams when you're escalating up the stack for further investigation, you could use Fusion workflows to segregate, to filter those detections out and send bespoke notifications to those teams as needed. So good questions there, folks. Thank you. No open questions at this point in time, so I'll pause again for a couple of minutes just to allow you to type out anything that you do have. Again, as a reminder, if you don't have any questions, then obviously first and foremost, thanks for attending today. Do hope you found it useful. And you will receive a copy of this presentation via email in the next day or two. And if you do have any questions beyond this webinar, then again, please work with your named TAM if you have one, or send an email through to our distribution list, which is tam-team@crowdstrike.com. And again, if you don't have anything, again, thanks for your time. When you do leave this Zoom meeting, you will receive a quick survey link just asking you what you thought of the content of the presentation and so forth. It only takes about 30 seconds to fill in. So if you have the time, we'd really appreciate that feedback from you. And again, folks, no open questions at this point in time. So I'm going to pause and let you type out anything that you may have. Thank you. Let's have a quick question chasing up slides for a previous session. Apologies if you haven't received those so far. They're usually sent out centrally within a day or two after the webinar itself. And it will usually, I believe at least, it will usually be a link to a download for the slides as well. So obviously, if you haven't done so already, please do check your spam folder, etc., to make sure you do have that mail there. And if you don't, then again, please contact your named TAM if you have one, or send an email to our distribution list, tam-t@crowdstrike.com, stating the session that you attended. And I'm sure they'll find a way to get those slides over to you separately. Okay, folks, still no open questions. So I'm just going to give you 1 more minute to type out anything you may be in the middle of. And if there are no open questions at that point, I will close today's session out. Okay, folks, as there are no more open questions, I will close out today's session. Again, should anything occur to you after we close today's session, then as shown on screen, either contact your named TAM if you have one, or send an email to our distribution list, which one last time is tam-t@crowdstrike.com. Thanks, folks. Take care.